Good morning, Faith Community, and Merry Christmas. I have shared with you this year, I love Christmas. This is one of my favorite days of the year. And one of the things that I love to do on Christmas is to just meditate on the first Christmas. That's really the purpose of the day. And I've always been really convicted that if I say I'm going to celebrate the birth of Christ, that it's going to be Jesus' birthday, but it better be Christ focused. I better focus on him. I better think about him. You know, Jesus, when he set up communion, he commanded us to do that in remembrance of him. And he attached value to remembering him. And so what I want to do is I want you to sort of slow down today and take some time to meditate on that first Christmas. What was it like? And here's my challenge to you. I want you to identify some of the misconceptions that you might have about Christmas. This is what I mean. You know, when we read through Luke chapter 2 and we read the story of Christmas, we oftentimes read into it our own misconceptions. We have these pictures in our heads from Christmas carols and from nativity sets that we sort of just imagine because what we've seen before. And sometimes it can be a little surprising when we read the text for itself. And so what I want to do is I want to point out to you a few misconceptions and some meditations for Christmas. So if you haven't, go ahead and read through Luke 2, 1 through 20 on your own and see if you can find anything you haven't noticed before. And pay attention to what you should be meditating on. If you haven't read it yet, go ahead and pause the video and read Luke 2, 1 through 20. Okay, did you read it? I hope you might have noticed some things. Something that helps is if you read through a passage that you're really familiar with in a modern translation or a translation you haven't read before, sometimes it'll help you notice some details that maybe your eyes just pass over because you're so familiar with the passage. Well, here's one I want to point out to you. In Luke chapter 2, verse 7, it says, "She gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped him tightly in cloth and laid him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them." Now, I don't know if you're reading it in the Christian Standard Bible, but you'll notice it says there was no guest room available for them. And the reason it says that is because that's the most accurate translation. If you go back to the King James, they translated this word inn. But the word here is actually not the word inn. There is a word in Greek for inn. We have it in the story of the Good Samaritan. You remember how the Good Samaritan, he takes care of the Jewish man who's hurt and he brings him to an inn. There's a word for an inn. That's not the word that's used right here. This word that's used right here is actually the same word used to describe the upper room where Jesus had the Passover with his disciples, where he shared his last Passover. It's a extra room that somebody would have in their home. You see, Bethlehem wasn't this large metropolis. It wouldn't have had inns. What would have happened as Mary and Joseph, when they arrived in Bethlehem, they would have gone to family members and friends and they would have asked to be able to be put up in a guest room. What I would imagine is they probably weren't able to travel very quickly. Mary gives birth when they arrive. And we get that because they're looking for a place to stay when they arrive. But most of Joseph's relatives and family members weren't slowed down because they didn't have a pregnant wife with them. And so when they arrive, there's no space left anywhere. And so what happens, they're put up in a stable. Now, the place that they're put up, most homes would have actually had a stable that would have been adjunct to them. It would have been sort of built into the house. And it wasn't too uncommon for people to stay there when there wasn't any room. But there was something about this that is uncommon. There's something uncommon about Mary and Joseph staying in the stable. What is it? Well, we see it when the angels talk to the shepherds. Skip down in the passage. You'll notice in verse 12, the angel says this, "This will be the sign for you. You will find a baby wrapped tightly in cloth and lying in a manger." The angel tells them exactly what Mary has just done. The angel knows what's happened there. But here's what I want to point out to you. The angel tells them this is what you're going to look for. Now, I think that in our imagination, sometimes we picture the nativity with such wonder that the baby Jesus, maybe he's like a glowing, or there's a star from heaven shining light straight down on him. That's not the case. As a matter of fact, what identified baby Jesus to the shepherds was this weird situation where there's a brand newborn baby laying in an animal feeding trough. Now, I'm sure that Mary had fresh straw in there and probably cloth laying underneath it, but the baby lying in a manger, that's not normal. That stood out. And it stood out enough that when the shepherds arrive in verse 16, they saw, this is it. This isn't something you see every day. Now, why did it need to be that way? Well, think about it. Because Jesus looked like a normal human baby. It says he had no form or comeliness that we would be attracted to him. He looked like a normal human being. There wasn't something about him that the shepherds could identify, some special birthmark or some glowing skin. He looked like a normal human because he came as a human being. He was incarnate in flesh just like you and me. Now, it's miraculous, but there was nothing to point towards that miracle. So the sign the shepherds were to look for was a baby lying in a manger. I don't know if you've spent much time meditating on these truths, but what I want to point out to you is the last thing in the passage. In verse 19, it says this, "But Mary was treasuring up all these things in her heart and meditating on them. The shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things they'd seen and heard, which were just as they had been told." I want you to notice Mary's response. What does she do? She sees the shepherds come, and she thinks about these things. She meditates on them. She remembers them. Take some time today to remember the birth story of Jesus and to meditate on it like Mary. And then look at the shepherds. They just witnessed angels. And the angels' glory was so terrifying, they fell down on their faces. But when they see Jesus, even though he looks like a normal baby, even though there's no frills in that nativity, they return praising God and giving glory to his name. I don't know how your Christmas celebration is going today. Maybe it's not as exciting as you would want it to be, but I want to tell you this. No matter how normal today is for you, you have a reason to praise and glorify God. God, the creator of the universe, came to his creation, took on flesh to be the Savior of the world. That's a reason to rejoice. Thank you so much for listening to me today. Merry Christmas.